So good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining this morning's webinar. We're going to be covering OTbase Asset Center 6.5 and some of the new features. We will take Q&A at the end of the session, and the recording will be made available to those who have registered. And from here, we will pass it over to Ralph, who will go through all the latest features and updates.
Okay, thanks, Braxton. By the way, just to introduce the guys, if you don't know them already, Braxton Huggins, he's our marketing director. Tavone Harris is the VP of sales, and I am the CEO and founder of the company. So let's keep it brief as usual. I'm going to share my screen and talk you through the most interesting new functions in OTbase Asset Center 6.5. Let's log on here. And the first thing I want to highlight is the new reporting functions. So you see here in the main menu a new item which is called reports. And when you select this item, you will see a couple of predefined reports that you can choose from. Now, before we go into the look and feel, let's start with how you can define what goes into a report. And that is super simple. You go back to the inventory, into the search page. And this is where you can set up your reporting. So as you may already know, in search, you can search for pretty much anything, for software products, for locations, for tags, everything. And you can then save a search in this Manage Searches dialog. And you see, I did that already for a couple of searches. And that was already available in Asset Center 6.4. And then all your saved searches can be loaded here in this drop-down. So for example, when I want to see those critical devices, I just need to select the entry from the drop-down, and I can also expand this list view here. Now, this is basically all you have to do to also define a report, because now when you go to this reports page, these are all your saved searches, right? And you see that critical device is saved search again here. But now if I select it with a double click, you see that there is some more information. Basically, it's the same table that you have seen in the search page, but in addition to that, you see charts for the vendors, the device types, and the models. And you also see a timeline, which we think is rather cool, because let's just assume you're using a project approach. So let's just say you want to get rid of some devices, some obsolete devices, or you want to introduce new devices. You know right away that your target number is, let's just say, 100 of those devices. And then you, in the timeline, you would see how you are progressing here. The other thing that's new is, well, it's not exactly new. So you have seen that before. This is a page that is also available from external sources, as you can see here by this link icon, which allows you to copy the URL of this page to the clipboard. And when you have done that, you can launch the same report from other applications, as you have seen it earlier, for example, with device profiles. So it works in the very same way. And also to go beyond the reporting here, this is something that we have changed in Asset Center 6.5. Now you can link to pretty much every profile that we provide in Asset Center, such as network profiles, location profiles, etc., via an external link. Never worry about access rights, because access rights are fully observed. That means when you just pass that URL to somebody who might not have an account in Asset Center or who might just have limited access based on their group association, then they will either not see the report at all or just a subset of those devices that they're actually allowed to see. Okay, so let's just look at a couple of other examples for reports, such as obsolete products. And here is just another table from a saved search. And again, here is the timeline where you see between those two dates here, the number went up. And that could have been due to the fact that some vendor simply said, okay, now you're at end of life for this product that you happen to use. Okay, as you can also see, you would be able to determine the specific stage of the individual devices. So some of them in our example are not operational, they are set to install. This is the blue line down here. Okay. And just another example, Windows XP. The timeline is empty because I had just added this search/report a couple of minutes earlier before this webinar started. That would be a very good example of a project that you want to track. So let's just assume you are aware, well, we still have a couple of devices running Windows XP, and we need to get rid of those. And then in the timeline, you could see how the number of these devices drops over time when you update or upgrade those devices to newer operating system versions. The other thing, finally, is this box right here, this checkbox. So by default, in this report, you will see the columns that you have selected in your saved search. Let's quickly go back to the saved search because this is an important feature. So in the saved search, in the columns header, and you do a right click, you open the context menu, and then you can tell OTbase which fields you actually want to expose here in your results. And that can include custom fields, such as these two below here. So mean time to recover and SAP equipment ID are fields that are not part of the standard OT-based data model. They have been added by the user, and you can also select those, and they will be exposed in the output. And the same is true for the reports. So let's get back to reports. Oh, excuse me, wrong item. Reports, obsolete products. So you will see the exact result that you have defined in your search. But here in the report, you can also quickly switch to all columns. So if for some reason you want to see something in addition to what was defined in search, you will see all the various fields that are available for these devices. Okay, so that's the new reports feature. The next thing I want to highlight is that has to do with vulnerability management. So let's go to the device inventory. Let's select a safe view here. And let's just say I'm looking at an individual device such as this one, and I am interested in its specific vulnerabilities. Now, the change that we have introduced in 6.5 is that by default, you will now only see vulnerabilities with known exploits. And if you're using OTbase already, you know, well, anything with known exploits is then exposed in orange, highlighted for you. And if you open this list, all of those are in orange. Okay, so that would be a, if you will, a prioritized list of the vulnerabilities that you would most likely want to care about most, because if there is a known exploit, this tells us that the probability of this vulnerability getting exploited is much higher than it would not already then be exploited by a known exploit in the wild. And this, as we believe, is stands for a very important shift in vulnerability management, especially in OT, because in earlier days, people were mostly concerned with criticality ratings, or with CVSS ratings, base scores. And this can give you a false sense of security or insecurity, because many of those critical vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities with high CVSS base scores have a very, very low probability of being exploited. And in our opinion, with the recent wave of ransomware, it makes much more sense. It gives you much more return on investment if you focus more on high probability, high likelihood, rather than a potentially disastrous consequence, because I mean, we have seen disastrous cyber physical attacks maybe once in the whole history of automation, but we do see a lot of ransomware attacks that also affect OT installations. Therefore, in our opinion, it makes more sense to focus on likelihood. So once that you switch this box off, as I did a couple of minutes ago, you see that this number all of a sudden dramatically jumps up to almost 4,000 individual CVEs that affect this particular machine. Well, I mean, it's not difficult to see why. It's running Windows 7. Here is the patch history. It wasn't patched really a lot. And now you see the view as you know it from Asset Center. You see all the CVEs, and those with known exploits are highlighted in orange. But on top of that, you have a ton of vulnerabilities that appear in black. Yes, they might have very high CVSS base scores, but the question is, should you be worried about that in the first place, or maybe just start with those, mitigating those with known exploits that you can revert back to just by clicking that box again. And as you see here, now the number of vulnerabilities for this device jumped back to 124 from almost 4,000. And certainly this gives you a much more, much better result set to focus on rather than those almost 4,000. Okay, let's look at the next feature. Also has to do with vulnerability management. Let's go to the CVE workflow. And you may have already seen this details page in the CVE workflow. It was already there in Asset Center 6.4. Now, here what you can do is this exposes individual vulnerabilities along with their hosts, with their individual devices, and now you can really fine-tune your result set in respect to what you intend to mitigate or what you intend to track. Again, this was available already, and it's again made possible via the managed views. So once that I've defined such a view, I can load it here from this drop-down. Let's just say Adobe or vulnerabilities associated with Adobe Flash Player. And then I get this result set. Or as another example that I did already, high priority PLC vulnerabilities. All of these in my filter here, you see that I've just entered with a base score higher than 8. And this is my result set. Yeah, it doesn't look pretty, it looks pretty nasty as a matter of fact. And now for those saved views here, we also provide you a timeline. So this is a new tab here in Asset Center and the vulnerability management workflow. And in this timeline, you can now also access those views that you have defined in details. And so, for example, if I pick this Adobe Flash vulnerabilities, I get a timeline which is similar to what you have already seen in the reports a couple of minutes earlier. However, it's a bit more verbose because it not only informs you about the development regarding number of vulnerabilities, which is this middle chart right here. It also informs you about number of affected devices and the cumulated V-score. I get to that in a second. So the number of affected devices, I think that's pretty simple. If you think about this particular example, so we are dealing with Adobe Flash and its plethora of vulnerabilities. You would, to put it very bluntly, be a fool to try to mitigate those vulnerabilities by installing updates of Adobe Flash, if you could, because the product is obsolete anyway. So the best course for remediation would simply be to just remove it from the devices where it still is installed. And then if you do that, the number of affected devices that you see down here also drops. So you will see a drop in the number of vulnerabilities, and you will also see a drop in the number of affected devices. And finally, here on top, we have the V-score chart, and that does not only factor in the number of devices, but also the CVSS base score of the vulnerabilities that you have now mitigated. And you don't need to argue with me that CVSS base score really is a problematic metric in OT. I totally subscribe to that opinion. But on the other hand, the question is, what can we use until we have something better if we also agree that the simple number of vulnerabilities is not good enough, because not all vulnerabilities are equal. So treating a nuisance vulnerability in the same manner as a highly critical vulnerability, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so just to give you some extra context, we also exposed this parameter up here, the summarized accumulated V-scores, that would then also allow you to get an idea, if you compare that to the overall chart, well, did I really make a difference? So this is the global V-scores down here. Did I really make a difference for the big picture with my mitigation efforts? Okay, then the next thing that we believe is pretty cool has not to do with vulnerability management anymore. In the inventory, we have now added the capability to directly import metadata from Excel. Why? Well, because many of you do have metadata existing in Excel tables that you want to use in Asset Center. Totally makes sense. And in the past, we have helped many customers in importing this data using Python scripts, only to end up with the idea, well, you know, this can be automated a step further so that we don't have to write all those custom Python scripts anymore. And the one thing that we used to struggle with is the mapping of fields, right? Because usually in your data, certainly as you have it in Excel, was not formatted in a way that OTbase could use right away. But then we think we have found a very clever solution to the problem that doesn't involve a lot of mouse clicking, as you know it from other products. Oh, I want to map this to that. So the solution that we have implemented here is that in your Excel table, you simply rename your column headers to something that Asset Center understands. So just as an example, if you have a column in your Excel table that provides some explanation of the functionality of a given device, and that column might presently be titled comment, then you would change that column title to description, and it will be ingested by Asset Center as the description for the device. Okay, and you could do the same thing with safety, criticality, with the stage that the device is in, the serial number, and so on. So this is how that works. When you want to use this feature, you would make sure that the column headers of your Excel table match the list that we provide you, that you also, if you are an OT-based user, you may already have seen that in the release notes that we have published a couple of hours earlier today. There is a list of all the fields that you can reference within that Excel table of yours. The other thing that is new here is that in your Excel tables, you could use the device ID to identify the device that you want to update, but in addition, you can now also use the name of the device. And why is that very important? Because in your existing metadata tables, usually you don't know what the device ID of that device is in Asset Center. And therefore, you had to pull it out first from OTbase and then copy it into your Excel table, et cetera, et cetera. And that is not cool, right? It is not cool, especially for those of you who have a well-maintained namespace, like a host name namespace or DNS namespace, that you could use to your advantage. And this is made possible now in Asset Center 6.5. So you can do your metadata updates by referring to devices with their name. And that works pretty well unless you have multiple matches. Then that record simply is ignored. But as long as there are unique names for your devices, that works just fine. Same thing for the locations, which is also an area that many users update with existing metadata. So if you wanted to, you can define your location hierarchy in Excel, or if you have something useful already, and then just load the Excel table using this lower area down here, and then you would be able to specify things like is this particular location a reference location? You could specify the GPS coordinates. You could specify the whole location tree in the hierarchy, etc. Okay, next new feature is in the events page, where we now include the capability to just export these tables that you see here, for example, new vulnerabilities over the last 7 days, to Excel. We have included this new button, Excel Export. To click on that button right here, and what you see here in the table will then end up in an Excel table, like so. Just a click of the button, and that's it. Then we have a new functionality for handling file attachments. So this might not be intelligible for those who haven't used OTbase already. Let's go to the device inventory, and let's just pick this one device again. So for every profile that you can open in OTbase and that may show the details for an individual device or for an OT system or for a network, you can always attach files to that device or to that location. We didn't do that in this particular example, but you can imagine how that looks like. There is another area in that profile. It's simply called files, and then you would see a list of file attachments that you can download just by clicking the mouse. And in the past, in order to use this feature, let's go to the user management. You had to be a member of a group that would have write permission for those devices, okay? And based on customer feedback, we have changed this. We have now also included this new permission here between read and read write, which is simply read and also files update. And if you select this setting, then this user would not be able to change metadata of the device or the location or whatever the item is, but they would be able to attach files to the device or location or network. Okay, so this is how that works. If you want to limit the capability to actually make metadata changes to a select few, then this is the setting you would use for anybody else who should also be allowed to attach files. Okay, that's basically it. The only other thing I want to point out here is that we are, as of today, entering our beta testing with the OTbase Service Graph connector for ServiceNow. So that's also something new. It's not directly related to Asset Center 6.5, but now we have this official certified standard service graph connector ready to go. If you are using ServiceNow and if you are interested in this integration, please contact us, best case Tavon Harris, that you want to participate in the beta program, and then we can get you set up within the next couple of days. So that's it. Do we have any questions, anything from the attendee side that we should address?
As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will make this recording available. We will send a link out to following this session. So if you have any additional questions, please reach out to Tavon Harris, th@langner.com, and we will set a meeting with you. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.